And courage and morality are actions. They're not things. And moral decisions are based on actions. It's not a thing.
Okay.
If I were burning you with, we would say that's causing harm. Therefore, I'm not moral. So just to make something clear here, Paul, do you believe that a snake spoke human language?
Yes.
Yes, you do. So then, do you believe that induction is a useful logical tool?
Yes.
You do. Do you agree that by using induction, we have to conclude that snakes do not talk?
Well, no, you yourself said if we have evidence that a snake talked, then that would falsify that position. So you're just begging the question against the Bible, assuming that it's false that the snake talked.
So if any book makes any statement that contradicts induction, we must consider that statement as evidence that contradicts induction?
No, and that's a false inference from what I said.
Well, what other evidence do you have besides the story in the third chapter of Genesis that a snake can speak human language?
No other evidence.
No other evidence, but a story, words on a page, basically, is your only evidence.
Well, according to my worldview, that would be God's word on a page, and God can never lie. So if you're assuming that it's not God's word, again, you're begging the question and assuming that it's false, which is the point at hand.
So when you stack up the millions or billions of examples of snakes that we've seen that do not speak in real life against a story that says that a snake spoke human language, when you stack those two side by side, can you fault us skeptics for going with the principle of induction, as imperfect as it is, over your one little story that many of us are convinced is just a story? Can you fault us for that?
Yes, because again, Mr. Barker, according to you, if you have a counterexample to what was an inductive generalization, and you have a counterexample which is contrary to that, that would falsify it. So you're still assuming that the biblical narrative is wrong there, and that's begging the question. Furthermore, I would fault you because you cannot even account for the inductive process.
I just told you that I could.
I'll get to that in my rebuttal.
Let me tell you a true story. As I was walking home from work today to get here in time to do this interview, this brown cat walked up to me and spoke to me in perfect Spanish and said, "Allah es el único Dios verdadero." I was surprised, but that really happened, Paul. This is a true story. Do you believe that?
Do I believe that?
Yes.
No.
Why don't you believe that? I just told you a story.
Well, because I think that you're lying, and I think that the Bible isn't.
That's my story.
I don't believe it because I think you're lying.
Why do you think that? You're free to call me a liar, but I'm not free to think the same thing of the Bible.
I didn't say you were not free to think that, but I pointed out that the epistemological point of the matter is the question at issue is if the Bible is true, that is a counterexample. So that's where
Then tell me why you think I'm lying. Exactly why do you think I'm lying about that story?
Because I think based upon an inductive generalization, I don't think that cats speak, or that a cat spoke to you, and that cats speak. But I believe that God could make that happen if He were to.
Well, then why don't you believe that God could have made this happen?
Well, because I believe that those miracles have ceased, and I think that they have redemptive and revelational character to context to them, and so there was no revelational context.
Do you even know what that cat said to me?
He probably said, "Hey Dan, how's the LSD?"
Well, that's what I think about the story in Genesis.
Well, they didn't have LSD back then, though, Dan.
Well, they had some kind of mushrooms or something else then. But don't you see how you're playing the exact same game with my story that I would play with your story?
Well, Dan, if your position was true, though,
better than mine.
If the cat did talk, if that is true, then that would falsify the claim that cats can't talk, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Right. And so if the story in Genesis, all you asked me was, how can you believe that snakes talk, given that all the examples we have of them are that they don't talk? And I said, well, according to you, if we do have a claim that snakes can talk, which we do in the Bible, then that would falsify it, even according to you, if the story is correct. And again, that brings us back to what we're debating tonight, is whether or not those passages are true. And you said that epistemology must even be addressed before biblical criticism, and so you have to bring up your account and justification even for induction.
And you now have an evidence that cats talk. I just gave you a story that cats talk, and yet you immediately rejected it. You immediately, based on something external to the story, based on not even knowing you weren't even there, you immediately rejected that story based on a solid principle of induction. And I praise you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was a smart thing for you to do, to be critical, to be skeptical, to apply your mind to statements that you don't think are true for logical reasons. And that's exactly what I'm doing. We both share the same epistemology here, Paul.
I understand that if you don't believe that it's true, then you would of course think, if you don't take Genesis chapter 3 as true, you would of course think that there's a problem mentioning a talking snake. But if Genesis 3 is true, then there is a problem. And again, that brings us back to what we're debating tonight. So all you're doing is begging the question against Christian theism.
Well, I have other reasons for doubting that the story is true. There are many good reasons for showing how that myth evolved from other myths and how the myth...
Again, that would beg the question, because according to my worldview, that's the very first two people that existed, and the very first religion was Christianity. So to say it evolved from myths assumes and presupposes that Christianity wasn't the first religion, and therefore assumes the falsity of the biblical account, and therefore begs the question again against my worldview.
Well, if you're going to throw out all of history, we know that Christianity was not the first religion. We do know there were pre-existing religions.
Well, if you throw out the Bible, Dan,
we know that the Israelites borrowed from other pagan traditions. We know that the book of Genesis was pasted together and created and swapped and borrowed and contradicts each other. We know that from using these very principles of logic that you value. We know that Bible is not a dependable, reliable witness to most of the facts that happened back then.
Well, I don't think you have a picture of that in your mind. And
yes,
you said knowledge is a picture in your mind, or an image in your mind.
Well,
and so I'd like to know what it looks like, what the image or picture looks like that says that they borrowed from other religions, if you could draw that picture.
Yes, I can. I can show you artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
Stelae with inscriptions that were from periods of time that predated the Israelites' occupation of that area.
But that's not what the question is about. The Israelites are relaying, Moses is telling a story of what happened before all of that. So all you're doing is assuming that Moses is lying. You're assuming that, so you're begging the question.
No, we have plenty of other good reasons.
I admit it was written later than the other documents, or that you can find earlier written manuscripts. That's not what I'm disputing. What I'm disputing is the claim that those, just because they were written earlier, means that necessarily implies that they borrowed from them. If the story of Genesis is true, then then Adam and Eve were the first two people. And
okay, I must interject here. Don't forget, this is actually Dan's turn across, and it seems like it's turning more into an argument back and forth.
I was just giving an answer back.
No, this is okay with me, Reggie.
It's fine with you? Okay, just making sure. Okay.
No, I like Paul. I like us going at it like this. This is just...
well, thank you.
You know, this is fun here. Are we done with the cross?
If you're fine with it. You have 2 more minutes to continue, Dan, if you have any more.
Well, morality was a question. I want to ask you a question, Paul. Do you think John Calvin was a good man?
A good man? No. When he was viewed as being clothed in the righteousness of Christ, and God looked at him upon the finished life and work and death of Jesus Christ, God viewed him as being good because it was Christ's righteousness. But no, according to Calvinism, if you're familiar with that, we believe in total depravity.
So Calvin was a depraved man, basically. Do you think his actions were good?
He probably had some good actions and some bad actions, just like everyone does.
And he wrote his Institutes, basically. Do you think we should admire the book of a man who brutally murdered one of his friends by burning him at the stake, tying his book to his body, destroying every one of his good friends' writings? Do you think we should admire a man who handled earthly justice with physical, bloodthirsty violence? Should we respect a man like John Calvin?
Well, there's much debate about him and Sir Rivetus, but Dan, in your book, Losing Faith in Faith, you say that when people attack use ad hominem arguments, that's a sign that they're are not confident in their position. And now you're engaging on an ad hominem argument.
I'm not attacking you.
You're attacking John Calvin, the man.
What your idea of morality is. Whom would you call a good man? I'm not attacking you at all.
You asked me if it was good that he's burning.
This is a perfect segue. Excuse me. Yeah, we're going to switch over this time. Go ahead, Paul. You can